Any questions? If not, it's really fine. I'm happy to talk. It's my job. Yeah.
I had a question about something I was curious about.
Yeah.
We're talking about reincarnation and
Yeah.
so on, and I know that there is reincarnation of lamas and rinpoche, and I was thinking to myself, is there a reincarnation of the Buddha?
Well, of course. I mean, okay, let's just look at this. Okay. Not in the formal way, maybe you say, oh, there's a reincarnation. Oh, that's Fred down the road. He's the reincarnation of Buddha. But, of course, because let's look at... Okay, first of all, the system in Tibet is unique to Tibet. They developed it over the centuries. I don't know when it started exactly, but this formal process of recognizing a reincarnated person, you know. It's only in Tibet they have that. But reincarnation in general is completely the way the universe is, Buddha would say. So then the second point is, then if you're on the path to Buddhahood, and there might be Mr. Buddha from 2,500 years ago, but there are countless beings who have become Buddha. There are countless beings who are already Buddha, exactly the same as the person who came here 2,500 years ago. There's no difference. Buddha means a mind of consciousness. Okay, the actual word Buddha, Sangye in Tibetan, refers to enlightened consciousness. So when your mind is fully developed, your consciousness, like any Buddha's consciousness, will pervade wherever there is existence. It is impossible that your mind can't be wherever there is existence, if you can try and conceptualize that. As I was taught as a Catholic, God is everywhere. Same concept here, same. Because consciousness is not physical, right? So right now, our mind, our consciousness, which also is not physical, but because of incredible delusions and negativity for countless eons, because of ego grasping, our mind is stuck in this body. We can't see past our own nose. But even as we start a little bit to progress spiritually and we lessen the delusions and develop clairvoyance and these things, we're literally expanding our consciousness. As Lama Yeshe says in this Mahamudra book, one of the characteristics of single-pointed concentration is you really develop very clear clairvoyance. He said in the beginning it's kind of weak, but eventually it gets stronger and clearer. And so literally from there all the way to Buddhahood, your mind literally keeps expanding in its capacity for cognition. So your consciousness, when it's enlightened, is necessarily wherever there is existence. I mean, do what you can with that concept. First point. Second, well before you become a Buddha, well and truly before you become a Buddha on the Bodhisattva path, you stop at some point needing to be reborn, needing to have a body. We have bodies now because we're compelled by our past karma to be reborn as a dog, a hell, a spirit, whatever, you name it. Keep circling around, But as we progress spiritually, we realize emptiness, we get bodhicitta, you keep progressing further, then you don't need bodies. At some point, you don't need to have a body. Bodies are grotesque and gross, which is a weird idea for us because we can't conceive of any other way of living except being a human, So then what drives a bodhisattva to want to continue to become a Buddha is unbelievable compassion. So they don't need to have a body, but over centuries and centuries they've been developing their motivation over life after life is bodhicitta, this powerful aspiration to only benefit others and to never give up being reborn again and again and again among crazy sentient beings in order to help them, in order to become a Buddha. So for example, okay, for one extra point here. So for example, if you're on the wisdom wing only, which is the Theravadan path, and the goal there, you graduate achieving your own nirvana, your own liberation from suffering. That's like you graduated high school. You abide by the laws of karma, you live in vows, you get concentration, you realize emptiness, and you're out of here. One life, at some point, you don't have to come back. You're finished. You're done. Your mind is now in a subtle state of bliss. That's your own liberation, your own nirvana. You're an amazing being already. You don't need to be reborn. You've finished. You've cut the motor, So life after life after life, your motivation has been, I must get out of samsara. It's renunciation. I must quit samsara. And then when you're in that particular life, when you finally realize emptiness, and in that particular life where you've perfected that realization, you've removed all the obstacles to liberation, you won't come back. You're done. So what kind of person you'd be is pretty amazing. You'd have incredible compassion. You'd have incredible love. But when you die, because your motivation life after life after life is, I got to get out of samsara, then your compassion is overridden by your motivation, so you don't come back. If you're on the bodhisattva path, you'll reach a certain point where you don't have to come back either, but because your motivation is bodhicitta, you want to keep coming back for the sake of others. And that's driven by this very particular level of compassion that's unique to the bodhisattva path, which is called great compassion. So compassion is, oh my God, look at the suffering. Great compassion is, oh my God, what can I do to take it away? And that's what drives the bodhisattva. And it's the unique characteristic of the compassion of the bodhisattva path. So you will continue. So when you die at a certain point, you don't need to come back. Your compassion overrides your bliss and your wish for liberation, and you keep getting reborn. So you don't need bodies, but you'll keep getting reborn. And even the lowest level bodhisattva already, as I mentioned, has the power to manifest their own mind in at least 100 different forms simultaneously to benefit sentient beings. So then you keep moving, keep getting more power, more liberation, more experiences, more spiritual growth, more realized of wisdom, more power, more compassion, until eventually you become an enlightened mind. There's no more work to be done. And now you have the ability to manifest your mind in millions of forms simultaneously, and you don't have a choice about it, because your job now is only to benefit others. So the answer to your question is, by the time you're a Buddha, it's not possible not to be reincarnating in all universes to be of benefit to sentient beings. It's just you don't recognize them. It could be that ugly old Nazi down the road manifesting as an old mean Nazi to get you to practice, but he's actually a Buddha. So they say this is the Bodhisattva teachings, which is kind of shocking to us. They talk about Tantra being difficult, or Bodhisattva teachings are difficult. On the Bodhisattva path, you know, if you don't need a body, you're finished. You're going to come back in any shape or form that's necessary to help you practice and to help sentient beings. So you'll manifest as a dog. You can manifest as an ant. You can manifest as an old beggar, some old grandmother somewhere. It doesn't matter. You were constantly manifesting. You don't look like a Buddha. Wouldn't go to that person for Buddha's teachings, but they're continuously manifesting to benefit sentient beings. So Buddhas are continuously manifesting, but there's no formal, the person who was called Shakyamuni 2,500 years ago, there's never been this formal thing of recognizing, that's the latest reincarnation, but there's no question they're all reincarnating in one form or another to help sentient beings. That's how they talk. Does that make sense? No. Okay, good. Yes?
So now I just want to know if I understand it correctly. So according to what I hear from you about karma, I understand that compassion is to everyone, because the one who suffers now, even if it's my beloved one, yes, or another one,
yeah,
or one who has great life,
yes,
it doesn't mean anything.
Right, it's changed from life to life.
So compassion really
is everybody. Yeah. So maybe I think
so
now.
There's no difference.
No, this is right. So let's look at the logic of this. That's why the wisdom wing is so necessary first, and the Four Noble Truths, which I only just began with before, didn't I? So let me just say a bit more about that, and that'll get us to compassion, give us the reasoning of why this is getting us ready, preparing us for genuine compassion, which does include everybody. That's the Bodhisattva path. So as I mentioned before, this is the prerequisite for getting that level of compassion, so it fits that we can do this. So, okay, as I mentioned before, the 4 facts for the noble ones. There's 3 levels of suffering in the first noble truth. Suffering of suffering. The second one is called the suffering of change, which seems kind of boring, but I'll explain. And the third is the most subtle, which is called all-pervasive suffering. So let that for now. So the suffering of suffering is... Okay, now let's go to the second noble truth. And like I said before, there are 2 main causes of my suffering. One is the past action that I did to make a mess of him, and 2, the delusion that compelled me to do it, and now I meet him and he harms me back. Speaking simply. And it's the same with virtue. The same with goodness. Except what I find fascinating. I said before, remember, maybe I didn't say it here. I did, yesterday. There's only one question one person has ever asked me about who revealed the teachings to the Buddha. The scientist in New Zealand. Did I tell you that? Yes. Yeah, there's that one question I've only been asked once. Well, there's one question nobody has ever asked me. And that is, Robina, why do good things happen? No one ever asked that question, because we're all addicted to misery. It's kind of curious. Even when we think about karma, it's always the bad things. It's really utterly fascinating. Because the fact is, because we've got attachment, which is this little greedy vampire in here, this very, hungry, and I'm not being sarcastic, we should be crying with compassion for ourselves, this hungry, needy little bottomless pit of misery in here, that somehow has this enormous, arrogant expectation that I deserve happiness. It's an assumption deep in our bones, and it's very fascinating. But somehow I don't deserve suffering. Can you get my point here? And it's very fascinating. Now, it's kind of interesting. I'm jumping around a bit here, but this is getting to the business about the second kind of suffering. So I'll get there properly. Okay. The first kind is when the bad things happen. The second kind is what's called the suffering of change. And reality is that's when the good things happen, which is why we don't think of it as suffering, which is why we call that happiness. And I'll explain. So the two main causes of the gross level, very simple, of my past suffering, of why he's mean to me now. First, my jealousy, but the reason he's mean to me, which as I said before when I mentioned that story about those nuns and people, or that woman in prison, to answer that question, why is it happening to me, which is a massive question we have. Well, Buddha says, because you've done it before. But then, like I said, we never say, well, why are all these good things happening to me? We never ask because we think we deserve happiness and we do not deserve suffering. But that's irrational for the Buddha. It's like you look at the bank. How dare there be no shekels in my bank? I deserve shekels. Well, somehow the number of shekels in your bank is related to your hard work. Normally speaking, you get my point. So deserve means if you did the work to deserve it. So you're very honoured. Well, I've got 1,000 shekels. I must have done 1,000 shekels worth of work. Good on me. And if there are no shekels, get my point, well, you didn't do the work. You don't look in your garden, who put weeds in my garden? I don't deserve weeds. You know that what's in that garden is yours. The flowers and the weeds are the product of your gardening. We somehow get that. So deserve is not the issue. You could say you deserve the weeds if you didn't do your weeding, and you deserve the flowers if you did. You deserve both. But that's a heavy word. And the Buddhist view doesn't use the word deserve. We use that heavy. It's heavy, When we hear about bad karma, you mean I deserve it? That's how we say it's the first answer. You mean that innocent little child deserves to be raped? It's too heavy for our mind, But if I say to you, if you ask me the question, you mean, Robina, that little girl who's got a beautiful daddy and a beautiful mummy and money in the bank and food and education and a lovely house and beautiful environment and good health, you mean she deserves it? We never ask that question. Do you get my point? Yeah. It's very fascinating. Because we assume we all deserve happiness. We don't ask what the cause is. We just think you better give it to me, honey, because I deserve it. That's really kind of arrogant. Do you get my point here? And that's what Buddha's saying. We have no sense of cause and effect. It's like you just assume that someone should put flowers in your garden. But it's your garden. Excuse me. You've got to do your own work. We get that when it comes to bank accounts and gardens. But when it comes to happiness and suffering, we've got this some kind of sort of assumption that good things had better happen, and how dare bad things. This is very fascinating, isn't it? Do we not understand? So that's attachment and aversion. So attachment's greedily assuming I deserve that. Really, we just want it frantically, and it's very sad. We're junkies, but we assume we deserve it. So we never think what caused it. We never think if he's kind to me, we should be thinking, this is amazing. This is the fruit of my past virtue. I better keep being virtuous. It's pretty reasonable. If you look in your garden, you've got veggies. Wow, look at that. That's the fruit of my hard work. I better grow more veggies, not to eat them up greedily and wonder where all the veggies went. You get my point? But when the bad things happen, like, wow. So actually we say, how dare that happen to me? What we're really thinking is, I can't stand that happening to me. That's more honest, and that's anger and aversion. So attachment hungrily wants the nice, aversion can't stand the bad. They're the responses of ego to when good and bad things happen. But we are the cause of them. It's very fascinating. I remember a person in Kopan, monastery, and this is typical, when she's in a wheelchair, right, and I was talking about karma, and she was in tears, and she said, do you mean I deserve this? And I thought about how to answer, and I said, yep, you deserve kindness and the beauty and your friends and your good morality and the support and the medical care you get. Yes, you deserve it. And she heard the point. Because anything that is good, we created it, but we take it for granted. That's the worst part. And that's why it's so tragic, because if we just do a bit of an analysis of us in this room in terms of advantages and good qualities and leisure a bit of money in the bank, not completely insane, not completely poor, not completely homeless, not completely raped every day, then it should blow our minds with humility and delight how hard we worked in the past to get this. But we don't. Because first of all, we don't think of cause and effect when it comes to good things, and we only moan about the bad stuff. But we should be blissed out. It's an interesting point, you know. So karma should be very uplifting, very empowering. And when we can own the good things, it's easy to own the bad. But if you're addicted to the bad, you go crazy, you know. It's very fascinating. So anyway, the point is, second noble truth, second fact for the noble ones, there are causes, 2 causes, main causes, many secondary causes all have to come together, all the external conditions. Of course, they're crucial. But you've got to identify the main ones. So we know very well if you want a rose, you need a rose seed. That's the main one. We know that. But you don't just hold it in the sky hoping a rose will come. You'll wait for a long time. You won't get a rose because you need the secondary conditions. The earth, the sun, the water. This is very obvious. So any moment of suffering, the main causes, your past action, motivated by a delusion. Any moment of happiness, your past action, motivated by a virtue. It's not that complicated. This is the logic of it, you know. So every moment, she's trying to work, she's good, Anne's helping her questions. Every moment of a happy feeling, keeping it really simple. Every moment of a pleasant feeling, that's the fruit of a past virtue. Every moment of an unpleasant feeling, that's the fruit of a past non-virtue. And so, of course, we added up to many moments called a month of happiness or a month of suffering. But each of them are out of millions of moments, which is millions of seeds ripening. This is technical, you know, and it's a natural law. So, okay, generally speaking, the gross level of suffering is when the bad things happen. And that's called the suffering of suffering. And the causes are very simple, harming others in the past. Because that kind of suffering is when bad things happen to us, isn't it? You get the sickness, you get the illness, that's from past killing. People lie to you, that's from past lying. People steal, from past stealing. People don't believe your words, past lying. No one gives you a job, past stealing. People don't, give you any gifts, lack of generosity. So it's pretty straightforward. The simple actions of being harmed by others, we can look at the different causes of them. And you just look at the thing that someone does to you, that's the thing you did. It's kind of not complicated. Good things as well. So that means you can be born in this life with a tendency to tell the truth. Like that woman on death row, she was completely truthful. But she had the karma called experiences that no one believed her. That's from past lying. The experience of being put in prison, that's from past kind of, it's obvious. Look at the experience. You can see the cause. From past lives, that's from imprisoning others, taking away their freedom, you know. You sort of see the experience of it. So a combination of those past actions, who knows, from 1,000 lives ago, they ripen in this particular life. So when the bad things happen, that's what we call suffering. Now, when the good things happen, that's what we call happiness. But I'm sorry to tell you, that's the subtler level of suffering for the Buddha. And he simply calls it the suffering of change. And it's not complicated, but it's got some kind of more meaning to it, so we'll go into it. But the simple example of it, the suffering is when your stomach's full, or the suffering is when you're hungry. Simple example. You're hungry. There's no food in your stomach. So it's unpleasant, unhappy, and you're distressed, you know. That's called suffering. The first one is the suffering of suffering. Simple example. The suffering of change is when you get the cake and you call that, and now you think now you've got what attachment wants. So speaking simply, the suffering of suffering is when attachment doesn't get what it wants or gets what it doesn't want. Him being mean to me. The suffering of change is when attachment gets what it wants. So attachment, if you think of it like I've used already the analogy, it's the mind of a junkie. That's the only way to say it. It's addiction in us. It's frantic. It's needy. It's hungry. It's emotional hunger, continuously there, continuously feeling I haven't got enough, continuously searching for something to fill up the gaping hole. The more there's the attachment, the more upset when it doesn't get what it wants, the more pain, the more loss, the more loneliness, the more sadness. That's because of attachment. Then when attachment gets what it wants, oh, that's happiness, you know. But this is such a simple example, but it's kind of annoying. Buddha's sort of being mean, pointing out what's so evident. So, you know, suffering is when you have the empty stomach, simply speaking, and now happiness is when you get the chocolate cake, we think. Attachment thinks. So attachment gets the object. So excited. You anticipate it. You can't wait. So excited. Anticipate. Get it. Put it in the mouth. And we know which hole. We don't put the cake there, do we? We're trained. We know which hole it goes in. So what's happening is the mind is, if you're really analysing your mind, it's going berserk. You're so excited. You can't wait. And you anticipate. You'll see it in the eyes. See this, think we just see this delicious, delicious cake just begging me to eat it, you know. So attachment grotesquely exaggerates its deliciousness because your stomach's empty. It looks divine. We kind of know this. And then all the anticipating, all the excitement, you get it in the first mouthful. Wow, it's so delicious. Now, relatively speaking, it is a delicious chocolate cake. You can't argue. It is a delicious chocolate cake. Maybe it won the chocolate cake, you know, down at the ladies. Do you have women's, well, in America they call it the women's something. Women's Institute, I think. And in Australia we call it the Royal Show. And you all come with your bags and you come and... You know, in cities, you did that. Maybe Tel Aviv's too new. Old-fashioned days when you had the farmers in the country and they'll come in with your goods and sell them and you have a big 3-day event. What do you call it? No, it's more kind of big than, it's more institutionalised. It's an English thing. Never mind. Not a Jewish thing, okay. Okay, never mind. So the point is, we can even say that chocolate cake really is a best quality, like made by the best chef. We could argue that relatively, conventionally, it is a good chocolate cake. But attachment, as we can see, has completely gone berserk, completely over-exaggerating its deliciousness, which is full of the attachment is expecting, attachment is frantic, it's needy, it's hungry, it's anticipating, and then what it's anticipating essentially is happiness. So initially, literally, you get happiness, a happy feeling. It's true. It's a very pleasant feeling, isn't it? That's triggered by meeting the chocolate cake when your stomach's empty. That's a fact. Pleasant feeling arises, doesn't it? If you like chocolate cake, it's a good chocolate cake, and your stomach's empty, all the conditions come together, the cake is very delicious. We know that. It's called a pleasant feeling. It's true. It is a pleasant feeling. But the point about attachment, it's so hungry and so needy. It gets that pleasant feeling on the first mouthful, right? But it's not satisfied. That's why we put a second mouthful in. And this is what's happening in the mind. We're still, oh, this is so delicious, I can't believe it. But already you're hungrily wanting to put the second mouthful in before you even finish the first one. I remember reading one guy who's a sex addict, you know, got the sex addiction now, narcotics addiction, alcohol addiction. We're now recognising attachment. And he said, and this is exactly how it happens. He said he was so attached to sex, exactly like that. He's on top of one girl thinking about the next one. Now that's what they do with Tinder. Do you have guys I've heard about Tinder. And one of the girls in America, they were interviewing all the young people, because now sex is easy to get. You go boom on your Tinder, you put a little thing, you go boom, see the picture, meet each other. It's free and it's easy. I mean, it's very skillful, really. But the point is, this girl said it got very depressing after a while, because you just finished getting out of bed, you're just getting clothes, you look over and he's on his Tinder for the next one. Do you get my point? That's how attachment works, because it's never satisfied. But we think when we get it, we'll get happy. But we're waiting for the satisfaction to come, aren't we? We're waiting to think, wow, that was incredible. Let me enjoy the bliss now. But what do? We keep eating. And then slowly, if you're really observing your mind, there's this terrible, painful period where you realise that now the happiness is going downhill. It's gradually, subtly sneaking up on you that pleasant feelings are no longer pleasant. It's now changed to unpleasant feelings. Your stomach is full. You look at the cake now and it looks revolting. Is this not scientific truth?
Yes.
Do you understand my point? Now, I'm going to be really gross here, but get my point. The best bliss in the universe, we think, is the best boy or the best girl, whichever body you like, you know. Or I'm sorry to be gross. Keep having sex with him. Don't go to sleep and get hungry again. Like go to the toilet, get hungry, then have cake again. No. Keep having sex with him. And I mean keep having sex with him. You're going to die of exhaustion and you'll be repulsed. You can't stand the thought of another moment of sex. You wish he would leave your bed for eternity. Hear my point. Are we communicating? So think of any object that has ever triggered pleasure. Is it not the same? Now, this is not being mean. But attachment's made up this massive fantasy. Massive. Because we'd go mad if we saw the truth. This is why it's painful to give it up. But we really, instinctively, attachment believes, especially in love, now I've found happiness. Now I've found my soulmate. We will be together forever. I'm not trying to be mean to us, but this is what attachment is frantically doing. Because you see, we understand that things change. It's our experience for countless eons. We know that the very thing that triggered the pleasant feelings, called chocolate cake, is the same thing that will trigger the vomit 20 minutes later. We know that, but attachment can't stand it. So we project another lie onto it. When I find Shuki, now I've got happiness. I project it into the future as never changing. And I just see this glorious road in front of me of happiness for eternity. All these delusions collude together to project that lie, because we can't bear the truth. Are we sort of communicating? So we're devastated every time. I always quote Nicole Kidman. I read an interview with her in Vanity Fair, one of my many reading magazines. Learned a lot about human beings in all these papers and magazines. And she was with Tom Cruise at that time. And she said, "We will be together until we're 80. Now, this is how attachment works. In the midst of enjoying the cake, there's this attachment really believes you're getting happiness, and that means we want it to continue. Nobody wants it to end. That's why it's so painful. We really believe now. You know, when you first go for a meal, you're thinking about it, you're hungry, and I'm completely attached to food, so I understand it well. You're sort of excited. You're anticipating. You're not like a 3-year-old anymore. We kind of don't show our feelings exactly the same. The little kid jumping up and down excited, then bursts into tears if you take her M&M, you know. We're more grown up about it, but we're so excited. You're so kind of anticipating, but you're very adult about it. You get to the restaurant, you can't wait for that delicious meal. It comes on the plate, it looks unbelievable, fresh and hot. You can't wait to get it in the mouth. But as you're eating, it becomes very depressing. It starts to look jaded. It doesn't look the same anymore. And you try to imagine another plate of the same meal. You think it might work. You hope. Well, I used to be into my cafe lattes in the morning. Now I drink my chai. I loved my cafe lattes. And I'd make the first one. And the first mouthful was heaven. I couldn't wait for the second mouthful. And then as it's going down the mug, I'm getting disappointed. Because the happiness hasn't come yet. I'm still wanting more. And then I'm thinking, I'll have another one. And it's never the same. We kind of know this, we take it for granted, but we never do the analysis. Buddha's questioning exactly this process. So we look really clearly, it's true, the object called the cake does trigger pleasant feelings, but they don't last. Not only do they not last, if you keep having contact with Shuki constantly, like I said, not going to sleep, constantly, please hear it. Or with a cake, you would be you'd die of exhaustion and full of loathing and repulsion. If you keep eating, you would die. It's like, it doesn't take much to die from heroin. It takes a lot more to die from cake, I agree, but it'll happen if you keep eating it. You keep eating, it'll happen. Guaranteed. So it's obvious that the very same object that makes you blissful is the same object, if you keep having it, that makes you want to vomit. This is scientific fact. That's pointing out Buddha's view that the way we get happiness now, it's a subtle level of suffering because it doesn't last. So then we'll go, yeah, we know that, Buddha. Why are you pointing it out? Can't we have any pleasure? And he says, you know what, guys? I've got some pleasure that'll last forever. And I know it sounds religion as soon as you say that, you know. And that's my point yesterday. So when he says the suffering of change, it's implying that, which is really happiness, the one we call happiness, the only happiness we know is when we get the object of attachment. Think about it. In general, in this world, the happiness that we call happiness is from the object, the person, the piece, the thing, the contact with this sense objects. In general, you know. This is the suffering of samsara, Buddha says. And he's not being mean and says give it up and be fundamentalist and have no happiness. He's given us a method where we can, by getting rid of delusions, can actually access this extraordinary joy that is natural within us. Now, but then we go, but that sounds like religion. I want to have sex happiness, please. You know, well, you can. In fact, your sex will be 1,000,000 times better when you've given up attachment. And that's not meant to be silly. That's a literal fact. You'll enjoy food 1 billion times more when you have no attachment, because your tongue doesn't fall out of your mouth when you've given up attachment. Just your attachment's gone. The vampire has gone. The junkie has gone. And so now you'll be able, because you're so in touch with your mind, and this is where Tantra comes in. The actual philosophical view of Tantra is so sophisticated. It's where this capacity to utilize this energy of this physical body, giving up attachment and delusions, you can have contact, and the smallest thing will trigger extraordinary joy in your mind. And you don't even need the object to have joy, but it will be extra pleasure, extra joy, extra happiness, better sex, better food. That's the irony, because you're not a vampire for it. You're not a junkie for it. You've given up being a junkie. So you don't chuck the baby out with the bathwater and give up happiness. We think that. You don't give up pleasure. You don't give up delicious things if you're in this world. You might need to initially if you're such a junkie. Like we all know, you can't give up attachment to alcohol while continuing to drink alcohol. We know that. That's where the hard work starts. But eventually, as you progress, you've got complete control over your mind. You're no longer hungry. You're no longer greedy. So you take or you don't have. It doesn't matter, because you're blissful anyway. This is what Buddha's saying. This is what Buddha's path is. Are we communicating here? Okay. So Nicole, she said, we will be together until we're 80. But then she was very wise. Next sentence, I remember it. If we won't be, I will be devastated. And she was. When he left her for Tom Cruise, when he left her for Penelope Cruz, you know. For Scientology. Huh?
No, for another.
No, he was already Scientologist. He left her for Penelope Cruz. I mean, that all happened about the same time. Whatever. I read all the papers, you see. And then she was devastated. That's what happens. When attachment is thwarted, attachment is exploded, it doesn't get its fantasy. And the more the fantasy, the more devastation. And this is why we suffer, because Buddha says the delusions are not in sync with reality. So it's like I said yesterday, these delusions are like you've got a 5 shekel note, but you think it's worth 500. So you're building up this fantasy that you really believe it's 500. And every time you try to spend it, you only get 5. So of course there's disappointment. What else do you expect? Because you haven't got the right view. This is how he talks, you see. So all these delusions are liars. They exaggerate. And the trouble is they're so habitual. That's why we say junkie's a good analogy, you know. They're not just occasional moments that they pop up. They're driving us at a primordial level. Does that help your question about attachment? Good, okay. See, the attachment, the suffering of change is what Buddha calls, what we call happiness. So the first one is when attachment doesn't get what it wants, which is the pain and suffering, and then attachment when it does get what it wants, which is we call happiness. He says it's a subtler level of suffering. Now, already understanding this opens our mind to compassion, because if we think suffering is only when the bad things happen, and we look at the world, then we'll only have compassion for the victims, and they have to be innocent. Do you understand? They've got to be innocent victims. So if you see me punch Shuki, and he punches me back, you won't have compassion for me. Yeah, she deserves it. Isn't it? Isn't it true? So Buddha just says we've all been punching since the beginning of this time, but we all deserve compassion too, because that's why we're so crazy, you know. So you're not going to find an innocent victim, Buddha says. That sounds heavy, but get my point, over the big picture long term. And so because we have a tendency to think, well, you deserve it, then we think, well, if we created karma, we all deserve it. So why have compassion? Wrong logic completely. The reason to have compassion is because we're all locked in this ridiculous scenario together, believing in all the wrong things, thinking by eating cake and having sex and killing and lying, I'm going to get happiness, and all we're doing is sowing more seeds for more suffering. It's a tragedy, you know. So break your heart for yourself first. That's what renunciation is, the first level of practice. When you realize suffering and its causes, you go, oh my God, look at this. And you don't have guilt. You have kindness towards yourself. It's like self-respect. You know what, Robina? I'm up to here with this. I'm sick of it, so I'm going to change. Then you're ready to have compassion for others. So it takes time. I'm sorry, it takes time to have compassion for mean husbands and, you know, ugly mummies and all the rest, not to mention terrorists and murderers. But we're capable as we progress carefully and skillfully on our own path, you know. That's why those young women, those young nuns, and of course we had compassion for our torturers. Not only because they knew they'd harmed them in the past, but crucially because they knew those torturers, they'd be the innocent little children in the next life. That's the thing we find very hard to expect. You see an innocent child getting abused, it's too hard to bear that was the horrible rapist of the past life. That's scary for us. Or that innocent animal being hurt. It's hard for our minds because we get very caught on that little bubble of this innocent little girl, you know. Then we see a monster male rapist. And it's very hard to imagine the monster male rapist will turn into the innocent girl. It's too hard for our minds. You get my point? That this is the view of karma, which when you take it on board is very profound because it shatters your misconceptions. It shatters, oh, I'm going to have this little innocent victim here, this monster man over there, you know. You go, okay, this is a bit of a loser in here, a bit of an illusion going on here, you know. We keep changing life after life after life after life after life after life, you know. Is that a stretch or a question, Sarah? Is that a question or a stretch? Oh, good, go on, go. And a stretch. So you're stretching at the same time. Go, honey.
If you think, if we believe that everyone is cooking whatever is eating,
Start again.
if one believes that, I'm eating what I've cooked in my past life.
Yes, right, sure.
So why somebody should be compassionate towards me? Because basically I'm eating what I cooked.
There you go. That's my point. I just said it. You just reaffirmed my point. That if we created the cause, if I punch Shuki and then he punches me back, you will say, well, you deserve it, Robina, don't you? Would you? That's what you're saying, isn't it? So then our logic is at the moment, we want to find a person who didn't do any punching. So a little child getting harmed, it's fairly logical they haven't had time to punch anybody, have they? You get my point now? So that's the view we have. So this view of deserve, like you're just suggesting, is based on the assumption that we all began in our mummy's womb and then suddenly good things and bad things happen to us. And there is no logic to that. Do you accept that? So as soon as we hear that Buddha says, but we created the cause, all the good as well and the bad, then we tend to think, oh, well, then you deserve it, so I have compassion. That's what you're saying, isn't it? That's the Buddha's point. Okay. When we start with ourselves in the wisdom wing, looking into this noble truths, understanding that my suffering is due to my past actions, so the normal response using what you're saying, the logic is, well, then, Robina, you deserve it. So we have guilt and anger towards ourselves. But the Buddha would say, no. It says it's because of ignorance. I didn't realize that what I did before. It's like if I get cancer now, I didn't realize that my smoking my 80 Marlboros a day back in the 1960s would give me cancer. So you don't beat yourself up and say, well, you deserve cancer, Robina. You wouldn't say that, darling. We wouldn't say that. But I was ignorant back then. If I knew then had the knowledge that smoking 80 Marlboros a day, it wasn't all the time, but that was at my peak, in between marijuana and speed. Altogether. So, get my point. If I had understood then, speaking simply, ordinary world, that cigarettes could cause cancer, then with respect for myself, I would have given it up. But back in a past life, I didn't know that when I cheated on Shuki, because he didn't find out that I was cheating, I thought I got away with it because I didn't understand karma. I didn't understand that I put imprints in my mind to be cheated on in a future life. So then out of ignorance, when you know out of ignorance that you do something, then you can have compassion for yourself.
There are people that are keeping doing things and know that it's not healthy for them, like taking a cigarette.
Okay, listen, okay. That's because, and we're all like that, because it's habit. So okay, this is interesting. So listen, okay. Have you noticed in your mind that you have a few habits? Maybe not the best habits in the world. You're like the rest of us probably. And do you notice they're hard to change, aren't they? Let's say we're attached to food. It's hard to change, isn't it? Well then, if you're being kind to yourself, you realise I'm a bit of an idiot. I've got this old habit and I do harm for myself. I get my acid reflux, I get my constipation, I get fat, whatever. You don't look like you get fat from it, some people. But you say, oh, come on, girl, give it a break. Try and give up the habit. We know how painful it is to give up habits, bad habits. You agree with that? Well, can you imagine being born with the bad habit of jumping on little girls? Can you imagine your mind, like my friend on death row, obsessed with torture all the time from having done it before? Then when you know yourself your own tortured, ridiculous habits, instead of guilt and beat yourself up and I deserve it, which is what we tend to do, is, oh my God, I'm sick of this suffering. Look at my ridiculous habits. And you have the wish to change yourself, to give up your bad habits. Then when that attitude, which they call renunciation, is coming from looking deep inside yourself and being a bit soft instead of heavy with ourselves and beating ourselves up. Then we can afford to look at, oh my God, everybody else is in the same boat. And we will not have that compassion until it starts with ourselves. And that it's literally true. Are you kind of seeing my point?
So basically you're saying that stop judging.
Good point. That's another way to put it, darling. Very profound. Recognize it. So if you know yourself, you eat too much and you get belly aches, let's just say, simple example, and you've come to terms with it and you've not been mean to yourself, beat yourself up, I eat too much, I'm a bad person, which we love to do, then if you're kind to yourself and you realize the habit, you're a bit softer and you give yourself courage, and then you keep falling down again and you keep picking yourself up and you keep falling down. We know that. But we have to be so kind to ourselves and realize that the habit's quite deep. Only then, when you see someone who is doing that, you see them shoving the food in, you won't criticize. You'll go, oh my God, they don't realize they're harming themselves. So that level of compassion cannot come till we have it ourselves. This is a really crucial point. So renunciation, which sounds forbidding, giving up, it means you realize that we are doing the harm to ourselves and have from beginningless lives, and you really are sick of suffering and you want to change. Then you can see others. So then you get compassion, but you're not sentimental compassion. You see the guy kick the dog. You don't go, oh, well, the poor thing can't help it, or the dog deserves it. You do everything you can to help, knowing they're both caught up in this ridiculous karmic scenario. Do you understand my point? So it really does bring a lot of kindness, not anger, not judgment, and that takes time. Do you understand? It's a really important point you made. Yeah.
I'd like to ask you advice.
Oh, yeah?
Two parts to the question. One, are there accidents, for example?
Okay, let's go further. In your garden, is there something that didn't come from a seed? Huh? Is there something that's random, that has no logic in botany?
The seed could have sprung in another...
Yeah, but that's not the point here. It's coming from a seed. That's the point. It doesn't matter where the seed came from. We know that if something grows, it has a seed. So karma's that. If you have suffering, it came from a seed. And because it's your suffering, it's your seed. That's the logic.
So
That's the logic.
let's put it.
Guilt and blame are anger. And guilt, it happens to be the object of that blame is self. Anger, the object of blame is the other. You get that? So it's exactly the same state of mind. And we all have those tendencies. Some people have more towards themselves, some people have more towards others. But even if you could see that some have more towards others, if there's always anger criticizing others, you also hate yourself. A person who has self-respect couldn't get angry with others. It's just impossible. It's schizophrenic. It couldn't happen. So we never think of it as self-hate. But if we've got hate others, we've got masses of self-hate. And anger is the natural state of mind if you have attachment. So attachment's the junkie in us that is the response to the root delusion, which is ego grasping. So the stronger the attachment, which is the stronger the junkie in us, it's like a frantic, hungry, needy, bottomless pit of little girl, little boy inside that's desperate and frantic and only wants nice experiences. Attachment can only bear the nice things. Can you hear that?
Yes.
Attachment's a motor that runs us all day. It informs all of our decisions, all of our experiences. And as soon as the nice thing happens, it triggers a pleasant feeling, so attachment just got what it wanted. And attachment's a junkie that can't bear anything unhappy. It can't bear it. So when attachment gets a terrible experience, when it stops getting what it wants and her baby died, then immediately intense aversion arises. Instantaneously, aversion is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants or when it gets what it doesn't want. Instantaneously, aversion. Now, there's a spectrum of aversion. The most intense anger, so then you're determined to blame somebody. You blame the doctor, you blame the hospital, you blame the boyfriend, you're raging, you're grief-stricken, but raging, and you're determined to blame somebody. That's the outer edge of aversion. Volatile, blaming other. It goes all the way into annoyed, frustrated, upset, irritated, worried, fearful, anxious. They're all versions of aversion, which is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants, when it gets the horrible thing, the nightmarish thing, like the baby dying. Then other people, and many of us too, it goes in to become despair, rage, internal grief, guilt, I'm evil. It's called aversion, it's called anger, because attachment didn't get what it wanted. That's the analysis. So what you're seeing is a person who's grief-stricken, broken-hearted because her baby died. So she's blaming herself. That's just called anger. You love her, hug her, even if she is the blame. Now, for example, I had a woman in New Zealand years ago who had an abortion because she was scared to lose the boyfriend. And in the end, the boyfriend didn't care. So she was devastated and raging too, the same. And we talked about purification practice, which is my next step to you. If this person's up to it, we'll talk about it before we finish. And she said, no, I don't deserve to have purification. I deserve suffering. So she didn't even want to change it. That's the tragedy of all the delusions, that we're very fixed. So you'd think that if someone says, oh, it's all right, sweetheart, you're not the blame, you'd go, oh, really, aren't I? Thank God. No, I am the blame. Ego grasping will. Because the nature of all the delusions is they hold on, they're tight, they grasp. And the irony is they're all bitter and miserable and negative and self-loathing. They're in their nature horrible. And we think they're virtues. 27 people can tell me I'm a nice person. No, hungrily wanting to say it again, but never believing a word. One person intimates I mightn't be the most perfect person, and we want to kill ourselves. That proves what we think of ourselves. That's the irony of ego. It's self-hate. So you love her. Hold her, love her. You can tell her you're not really the blame. She mightn't want to hear it. She can't hear it. Because when you do think you're the blame, you'll never give up on it, because that's obsessive anger internalized. And we don't choose to do it. It's a deep habit. So it needs courage to stop blaming yourself. Like it took courage for that woman to stop blaming all the people who put her on death row. That's how hard it is. We've all got it. It's ego. It's the way ego is. And it sounds mean to say it's self-pity, but it is. Ego in its nature is self-pity. Poor me. It's ego gigantic, but I'm a creep. Depression is just internalized anger. This is why I shouldn't criticize any of these states of mind. We should be crying with compassion for ourselves. Love her for who she is. Love her, hold her, love her. It's all right. And go through it. If she's brave enough to want to look at the logic of it all and realize she didn't do anything wrong, then she has to be brave enough to do that. But maybe she did do something wrong, and that's where it becomes even more unbearable. Like that woman, she can't bear to own it. And that's where guilt gets paralyzed. We never get past guilt. But the more you recognize it in you, the more you can help her. Because we've all got these. We're all our own variation, Do you understand?
Yeah.
Good. Yes.
Why don't you meditate a little bit?
Who?
We.
You do your own meditating. My job is to shove Buddhism down your throat. You go home and do your own meditating.
Thank you for it.
Okay.
No, I never do it. Maybe 3 minutes I might lead a little meditation sometimes. Maybe 30 minutes sometimes I do.
Okay, but meta practices.
Excuse me, do it on home on your own.
Okay, that's what I wanted to ask about compassion, because the side of wisdom, that's what you teach us. But there is another side of the practices, no? The meta practices for compassion, for ourselves.
I'm giving you all the techniques for compassion. And I'm talking about thoughts and concepts. There's different kinds of meditation. There's many ways to meditate on these things. But I'm giving you the logical basis for how to try and develop it. And that means start with compassion for yourself. Then, like she said, perfectly. Oh, you mean you stop judging? Perfect. So I understand your point, but I'm not going to lead you. I'm not going to lead you in a meditation. You lead yourselves,
I asked why, and you answered.
darling. Anyway, so kind of you to ask me. Thank you. Sometimes I do, not all the time. Go on. Who else wants to ask me a question? No more questions. Yes, go, honey.
Still waiting for my answer for yesterday.
Oh, yeah, tell me what it was. I forget.
About this purification, what it's
Oh, yeah, I'm about to do that now because we're talking about karma. Okay, there's a really nice way to remember it, the 4 R's in English. There's course notes that I emailed him in a PDF. These teachings I'm giving you here are in those course notes. So you email him and he'll send it. He sent it to you already. It's all there. So there's a chapter on karma. So let's look. We talked a bit about how you create it. Now let's talk about how we purify it. So karma psychology, okay? It's your mind, how your mind works, how you create causes, how you sow seeds, how you develop habits, Okay. Okay, it's 4 steps. Regret, reliance, the remedy, resolve. It's a simple way to remember. There's all these different words they use, okay? Now, regret, but it's in your course notes on the PDF, which he emailed you. Never mind. Regret, reliance, the remedy, resolve. It's just a good way to remember these words, and I'll use different words in a minute. Now, regret is what we've been talking about right now. And this is a massive point that really does take time to hear. And I'll explain again. She's great. Okay, what is regret? It's Dalai Lama, I always quote this. Dalai Lama was asked one time, what is the difference between what we call guilt and regret? Okay, so he said, guilt, you look in the past, it's just what we're talking it right here. We go, I did this, I did that, I did this, I did that, and then we conclude, and I'm a bad person. So this is natural. It's the way ego is. We run to it like a magnet, okay? So don't blame your Jewish mother or your Catholic mother. It's not their fault. You got born with it, okay? First point. Then he said, but what regret is, and that's just a word. You can use remorse, regret, whatever word works, and you have to give a decent definition to it. Don't just, because it's got a very specific meaning here. A specific meaning here. So as His Holiness said, the first part of regret is the same. You listening to me, people? You can't look at another person and listen to me at the same time. I sound like a policeman, don't I? So I'll start again. Regret, the first part is the same. You look in the past. I did that. I did this. I did that. You say, I did it. You own it. So you own it. The first part's the same. But the second part is profoundly different. And we have to practice this. The second bit is, what can I do to fix it? So Martin Luther King said the same thing about anger. It's good to be, you've got to recognize there are bad things happening. So normal anger would be, look at those people do this. Look at those evil people there. Look at those monsters over there. That's the first part of anger, isn't it? You point to the people. You did this, you did this, you did this. You with me, people? Mm-hmm. The second part of anger says, you're bad. That's the judgment part. So Martin Luther King said, you need to see that there's bad things happening. So you do say, oh my God, look what those people are doing. It's exactly the same as regret. Oh my God, I did do that. Oh my God, he did do this. Look at those people dropping bombs. Look at those racists. Look at those people doing those terrible things. That aspect is not judgment. That's seeing a fact. You did kill. You did lie. You did cheat. That's a fact. Are you hearing me so far? That's the first part. You have to see it. So as Martin Luther King said, you need to see there's problems. But the second part, the same as the Dalai Lama said, as he said, whether it's anger or guilt, now you say, what can I do to help? Instead of saying, you're evil, and instead of saying, I'm evil, which is our conclusion. Are you hearing me here, this point? With anger, we say, look at that bad thing, look at this, look at that, and then we say, and he's evil. That's the judgment part. The first part's not judgment, it's common sense. Judgment doesn't mean you say, oh, there's not really a war happening, it's just my projection. Excuse me, there's a war. People are killing each other. That's a fact. So we have to distinguish between seeing the facts. People are harming each other, but then compassion says, what can I do to help? So here, with regret, it's identical, but in relation to yourself. You own you did that thing. You own, I did do it. I did cheat on Shuki. I did do that. I did kill the ant. I did kick the dog. And this is enormously powerful, but very terrifying. Because guilt grabs onto it and tortures yourself with it. Do you understand? But ownership of it is, oh my God, it's true, I did. And then you say, what can I do to fix it? This is a profound difference. Can you not hear that? It's quite, the anger is exactly the same. It really is the same. But we tend to think all of it is judgment. But it's only the second part that's the judgment. I'm a bad person is the judgment. He's a bad person. That's the judgment. They're evil, blah, 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 all that. That's the anger part. That's the guilt part. The first part is common sense. If I did cheat on Shuki, I've got to recognize I cheated on Shuki. But ego wants to say either, well, it's not my fault, or it's his fault. We can't just own it for what it is. That's what's powerful. It's painful. It's difficult.
Guilt doesn't let us take responsibility.
Pardon?
Guilt doesn't let us
Precisely.
take
It is
responsibility.
no sense of responsibility at all.
And the anger is justifying.
And anger is another one of, is like, yeah. And it's like, but keep remembering that anger or guilt, they're both expressions of the same delusion. They're the response when attachment doesn't get the nice things. And that's hard to see initially. And it's an addiction in our mind. It's addiction, it's an addiction. It's not the irony of it. If we didn't have attachment, we would not have guilt. Not possible. If we didn't have attachment, there is no way we could have anger. Impossible. When we see this relationship between these two, it's quite interesting because it's not how we think in the ordinary world, So the first part of regret is the ownership that I did this and did this and did this and did this. So you have to ask your question, well, logically, why would I want to own the fact that I cheated on Shuki? What's the point of all this? And that means we have to understand karma, which is that Buddha's saying everything I do and say and think leaves seeds in my mind that will ripen in the future as my happiness and suffering. So once we take that as, that's what ownership means. That's what responsibility means. You recognize you ate too much food, the ordinary example. You recognize you ate too much and you know that you'll get acid reflux. So you know that. So saying to yourself, well, I did eat too much, but it's not my fault. Or I did eat too much, but you made me eat it. Or I did eat too much, but it's just the cake was so delicious, what could I do? That's not taking responsibility. You get my point? But I did eat too much, and what am I going to do about it? So I have to recognize it's my habit. This is just ordinary example. Recognize it's my habit, recognize it hurts me, and I've got to be sick of it before I decide to change. We can see this. If you're alcoholic, or whatever extreme example, sometimes you've got to fall flat on your face and really suffer before you finally realize you're fed up with suffering. And then you'll make the decision to change. We understand this, don't we? And that's what this regret process is. So it's healthy. And it's brave, because who wants to own their mistakes? Not blame yourself for it and sink into misery and swim in the misery of guilt, or blame somebody else. In fact, we have three modes. Okay, all the lamas always use the example here of if you've eaten poison. So doing negative things is like eating poison. It's going to bring you future suffering. And already this is the point that really takes time, because we're not used to hearing about karma. And if we do hear it karma, we take it as blame and shame and deserve and that kind of heavy duty stuff. It's not meant to be like that. Out of ignorance, I didn't know there was poison in my dinner. Out of ignorance, I didn't know there was poison in my dinner. So someone says, oh my God, Robina, there was poison in your dinner. Now, one response would be, oh my God, I'm a bad person. I ate poison. And you get sicker every day, and you're getting worse and worse and worse, and all you do is have self-pity, I'm a bad person. I mean, how bizarre. Nobody in any common sense would do that. You understand? You'd go, oh my God, what an idiot. Quick, what can I do about it? Immediately, because you know that poison will bring suffering and you don't want suffering. There's no drama about it. But when it comes to morality, it's so ridiculous, The other one is anger. Robina, there's poison in your dinner. Who put poison in my dinner? And you're getting sicker and sicker, and you're determined to find someone to blame. That's like you're dying of cancer and you keep smoking through the hole in your throat and you try to sue Marlboro. With respect. That's called anger. No responsibility at all. Guilt, not my fault. Keep smoking. I'm so bad. Keep smoking. Not my fault. I'm so bad. Or whatever. Guilt, The third one we have is, Robina, there's poison in your dinner. There is not. So we have guilt, blame, denial. That's our scenario. They're all the product of ego grasping and attachment. So regret is a healthy, self-respectful, courageous attitude that accepts that I'm this ridiculous samsaric person, ridiculous countless lives, up and down like yo-yo, and you know what? I'm sick of suffering. And the causes of my suffering are my ridiculous actions. You've got to kind of be a bit loose about it and kind of brave, and we're all in the same boat. So it takes courage to do that, and that's ownership. I did cheat on cook. Like, you do this practice at the end of the day. Best then. As Lama Zopa says, we're insane not to do it every day. So this first step, you do it at the end of the day. So you relax, you sit down, you be comfortable, There's a way of doing it that's not like holy at all. There's lots of ways, as we know. You can have a sadhana with bells and dorjis and blahs and Sanskrit. Keep it simple. It's like you talking to yourself. It's like you being your best friend. And I really mean that, sincerely. Because we talk to ourselves day and night, but it's usually abuse. We rarely tell ourselves good things about ourselves. We rarely rejoice in our good qualities. We really, really don't. We're like our own worst enemy. We want other people to say the good things. And then we don't believe them anyway. So we're just ridiculous, So this one is acknowledging today. Okay, just check on the day. kick the dog, shout at the driver, abuse Shuki, whatever, simple. And if you did kill and steal and lie and rape, they'll acknowledge that too. So then you're saying to yourself, well, I did do it, because of my anger, because of my attachment, my ridiculous habits. And Robina, I'm sick of this. You've got to be talking to yourself like this, I promise you. So of course I regret it. So regret means I did do it out of ignorance and habit. And it's an old habit, and I know that, and it's okay. But I did do it, and I regret it because when I did it, I just wasn't thinking that it's going to cause me suffering. So it's a kind of regret's like a kindness. You see, one of the things that I've noticed from people's questions, let's say for me, when I do my purification every night, I always remember my abortion. Just this one I remember, One of the things I did, killed a human being in this life. So I always say to myself, and I regret killing that human being. I think of that human being, when I was 23. But I say it. So then some people say to me, but what do you mean you regret it? Because when you did it, you didn't know any better. So sort of regretting is saying, I shouldn't have done that. Whack, kill, punch. How dare you do that? That's not regret. It's recognizing out of my own ignorance at that particular time, I didn't know that I was killing a human being, and I didn't use those words. I didn't think that. Even though I'd been a Catholic, I just knew I didn't want the end product, a being in my life. It was totally self-centered. I was sad. But I didn't recognize what I was doing, using karma as my basis here, which is the one I'm choosing to use as my basis. So, of course, I regret my foolishness because it was ignorance. So I didn't know that I was sowing seeds in my mind that in the future will ripen as my getting killed. And do I want to get killed? Hey, no thank you. Do I want ill health? No thank you. Do I want to die young? No thank you. I mean, this is abstract and we don't think about karma much. So then I regret it because I don't want the bellyache. That's all the same. I don't want to get sick. It's the analogy. Poison causes sickness. Killing causes future suffering. Of course, you've got to have this view of karma. Think it through, the nuts and bolts of it, if this makes sense. For this to make sense, from the big picture point of view. So regret's a wholesome, self-respectful recognition. I did dumb things that have sowed seeds in my mind that unless I change them will ripen as my suffering. And guess what? I don't want more suffering. I'm up to here with suffering. That's the first step. So then, of course, you'll think, and then you regret whatever I have done since beginningless time to harm countless sentient beings. Of course I regret, because I don't want the future suffering. So, okay, as Lama Zopa says, the first level of practice, stop sowing more seeds. Stop killing, lying, stealing. This is the second level of practice. Now take care of the seeds we've already planted in the past and put atomic bombs on them, at least prevent them from growing as suffering. This is the main level of practice according to karma. And it's so kind of practical if we take karma as our view. So regret is the first step. I own it. I acknowledge I did. Now, what can I do to heal it? What can I do to fix it? Okay, I can't make that life come back. That's not the issue. I can't take away the bad words of Shuki. I can't do that. But I can own that I did it. I recognize the suffering as causing me, and I recognize the future suffering. And so in other words, regret's like compassion for yourself. You could say that. The Buddhists don't say it that way. But it's like compassion for yourself. Owning it and knowing you don't want the future consequences. That's regret. Then you think, whom can I turn to? Where's the doctor who can give me the medicine to be the antidote to this poison? That's the second step. That's reliance. Now, look at the difference. When I was a Christian, the first step, we called it confession, didn't we? I did anyway. So I had to do the same thing. I had to acknowledge I did this and this and this and this and this. But the difference is, because those actions were things that God said I shouldn't do, then my attitude would have been deep regret that I did them because I went against God. Then my next step, whom would I rely upon? God, and then I have to beg him to forgive me. That's the practice, not here. Forgiveness is fantastic, but that's not what fixes me. I have to fix myself. Buddha will forgive you. He's a nice person, I promise. But it's not his job, because it's got nothing to do with forgiveness. And listen, even in ordinary life, you listen to this. In ordinary life, if I'm mean to Shuki every day and I'm driving to work and feeling all this guilt and shame and, oh my God, he'll reject me, and worried and fearful, mainly because I think he'll reject me. I'm so scared. So I ring him up, darling, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to abuse you, And he says, all right, Robina, I forgive you. The relief is enormous, isn't it? And it's good to have that. It's good to be forgiven. It's very powerful. But I think if we think his forgiveness is what makes me better, no, there's a piece missing. The fourth step, which I'll get to, is when I decide I've got to stop doing this. So really we often use each other to make him get me off the hook. Well, if he was really my friend, he should say, Robina, you've been telling me you're sorry for a long time, but unless you make some decisions to change, why should I forgive you? He's right. He should give me to make a promise. But we just use each other to make me feel better. That's quite heavy. Are you with me, people? Can you get that? Well, it's very manipulative, actually, because ego wants to be, if there's time, attachment to what people think of us is our worst attachment. And I'm just terrified he'll reject me. And as soon as he says, all right, Robina, I still love you, we go, oh, phew, got away with that one. But until you do the fourth step, which we'll get to, nothing will ever change. So forgiveness isn't the issue here. It's ownership. Then you turn to the doctor. And just in the same way the doctor doesn't heal you, give you a pill, say, here, the Buddha doesn't heal you, but you rely upon the Buddha. So we do a particular practice called Vajrasattva. You visualize above your crown, the Buddha, and you do a little refuge thing. Take refuge. But actually, it's just more like to think, thank God I got a decent doctor. Thank God, thank Buddha, whoever you like, The Buddha, take refuge. Now, there's a second part in reliance. That's where you have compassion now. The first one's like compassion for yourself. Now I will think of the harm you have compassion for the person you harmed. I have compassion for the baby who I killed in my womb and whose abortion was also mangled. Even worse suffering. I have compassion for that person. I have compassion for the dog that I kicked. I have compassion for the people that I've harmed. First is compassion for yourself. That's regret. Second is compassion for the people you've harmed. That comes second. Now that means if you're brave enough, this next step, if you're brave enough, you will now think of the people who harmed you. If you're not ready, don't go there. So let's say he's the abuser, not me. Why should I have compassion for Shuki? This is the question, We've said it already, but like those young nuns. Because the reason I'm in this relationship, we've got karmic connection together, the only possibility of his harming me, why, is because I've harmed him in the past. There's no other way. It's not possible otherwise. And that's hard to hear, but that's the logic of karma, how it can only be natural law. Literally, anything that happens to me, from the point of view of the karma that's called experiences, similar to the cause, which is the way I'm seen and treated by others, is the result of actions like that. And karma's pretty personal, So this is a tough one, but if we have that view of karma, like those young women, those Tibetan nuns who got tortured and sexually abused, if that view makes sense, that was that, and they sincerely meant it, And of course, we had compassion for our torturers because we knew we'd harmed them, so you were the cause of it, and because they will suffer in the future. And that's the basis of compassion for the person who harms you. But if you're not ready for it, don't go there. This is very powerful, this one. Don't play with this. It's not some sentimental, gooey feeling. Often we can think we've got compassion, but there's still rage in there. We've got to deal with our mind, Know where we're at. Unpack it. Be sincere. Observe it. But if you can, wow, atomic bomb, Next, the remedy. So in general terms, they often refer to this step as the antidote. Well, whatever you've just regretted, a normal way of describing an antidote to it is do the opposite. So in daily life, if I'm regretting killing, I'll clearly go and save a couple of animals, save the ants instead of killing. That's an obvious antidote. Taking care of 6 people is an antidote to killing. Telling the truth is an antidote to lying. That's natural anyway in your life. But here, because the particular practice that all the lamas praise is the visualization of the Buddha, and this particular visualization and the recitation of a certain mantra. And that's always, all these Tibetans would always say the practices that relate to the Buddhas are way more potent, more powerful, more marvelous than other practices. But that's up to each of us individually according to where we're at, So the third step, you'd do this visualization and you recite this particular mantra. Visualizing, purifying, And that can be as long as you like. You do that as you wish or whatever you like. And the fourth one, as Babonka Rinpoche says, the most important. Resolve, the determination to change. And that's where with this one. We use him to get me off the hook. I still love you, Robina, but I never make a decision to stop shouting at him. Then you will never stop shouting at him. This is so simple, it's embarrassing. This fourth one's really profound. So I've got to look at my old habits, you know. So here, let's say I've got a vow not to kill, which I have, then you'd reiterate those commitments, those vows. You will say at this 4th step, I will never kill again. I will never lie again. I will never steal again. Whatever. The things you can be confident you can keep. And don't think it's like wishful thinking. Every thought counts. Every thought counts. So it's like doing push-ups every day. You keep getting better at it. So here, mentally, you're doing push-ups. You're doing these strengthening, this decision in your mind. You're digging deeper and deeper that groove, the habit to not kill, not lie, not steal. This is the most powerful. This is where you really make the changes. So, okay, I've got a habit to shout at my hubby. You don't lie to yourself and say, I'll never shout again. You know you're not ready for that. You don't be silly. So maybe I'll sincerely say to myself, I will not shout at Shuki for 10 hours. And because you're doing the practice at the end of the day, you go to sleep and you'll keep your vow. And I'm not kidding. So you get into the habit. So next day maybe you say 11 hours, 12, even say 1 hour. Lama Zopa says even 5 minutes. I will not shout for 5 minutes. You start somewhere. It's very humbling, but it's very powerful. And we never do this. We just keep beating ourselves up. I'm hopeless, I'm no good. Oh, all tight and mangled, you know. You're very clear. You make a decision. And we all know when you make a decision, you keep it. You do it. You can say for 27 years, oh, I should go on a diet. Okay. So are we communicating here? Yep. So this 4th step, it's, you know, you've got to be realistic with your own mind. And you won't do this if you don't have regret. And you can't have compassion if you don't have regret. And you won't purify it if you don't have regret. So it's a really logical process. And it's incremental. And it's one step at a time. And it's courageous and it's practical. Because remember, every thought counts. It's not wishful thinking. It's not crossing your fingers. It's you reprogramming your mind. And there's no karma we can't purify. Are we communicating? Can you see the logic of this psychology? Is it answering your questions? Do you have questions about it? You look doubtful. Hang on, Betty. What's your problem?
What happens if I resolve to not do anything, but then
Of course you're going to make a mistake. We're natural. You got to sort of, that's why you don't lie to yourself and say, I'll never shout again. You make a decision sincerely. You do your best. What happens is you shout again. What do? You tell me what you do. What would you do?
I go through the process again.
That's right. And then what if you fail again?
I will lower my bar every time.
And then what if you fail again? And we do. You just keep moving. You know, I'm going to ride a bike. And you get on the bike and you fall off. What do you do again?
Try again.
And what happens again? And again. And again. And again. That's it. That's called practice, honey. You don't just play Mozart once. You don't kill yourself because you can't play it perfectly. But when it comes to morality, we have a panic attack. Are you understanding me? You've got to just keep moving until you realise emptiness. It's way to go, baby, several lifetimes. But you've got to be realistic and sincere and honest and have the courage to keep doing it. Pick yourself up and keep doing. And then we forget and you fall down and you pick yourself up and you just keep moving. It is logical, but it demands courage and seeing the logic of it.
Persistence.
Do you understand?
Yes.
But then,
Good.
how do you continue this? I mean, I would take a bus and stop going on a bike.
Yeah, but that's not the discussion here.
No,
But-
but I'm talking about it.
I know, but that's not the point here.
But that's the point. If
No,
you
it's not the point.
continue-
Okay, go. So tell me this. So give the example here of doing a negative action. What's the alternative
I'm
to?
saying if I continue failing, like I'm shouting and I'm promising to myself I'm not going to shout for 2 hours,
Yeah.
and then I'm shouting again. And
What would you
again
do?
and again and again.
So good. No, this is stop. This is a really good discussion. Good. Now we're getting to the point. When you really see that you've got so much heavy karma with this guy, no matter how hard you try, you're not capable of shouting again. What will you do? You will leave. You remove yourself from the condition. That's a perfect point. But we never do it. Tragically, we never do it. And that's why we kill each other eventually. Because we don't realize our human nature. That's the tragedy. That's the tragedy. That's a really good point. Well done. You have to leave. You have no choice.
But what if
What?
that situation is that you cannot live like...
You can leave.
No, I'm
You are not in a prison.
No, I'm not talking
What?
about the person.
What?
Let's say
Go
I
on.
am addicted to sugar.
Go on then, the question.
Chocolate.
So what's the question?
And I want to commit to not eating sugar
Okay.
for a day.
Good, so what's the question?
And I repeatedly
Right,
fail.
fail. So what's your solution?
That's what I'm asking.
That's what I'm asking too. What's your solution if you're an alcoholic? What will all alcoholics at AA tell you what to do? What would they suggest you do first? What would they suggest?
Bring it into my home.
No, they'd say to give up alcohol.
Yeah.
So how maybe best you give up sugar then? That's the but no, stop. Then stop. That's the answer. Some people have an allergy to peanuts, right? I understand your point, but we're trying to be realistic here. So some people have an allergy to peanuts, and the poor mothers are frantic at every label, constantly making sure there's no peanuts. What can you do? You've got to be realistic. What can you do? Tell me your solution.
I don't have one.
Yes, you do. It's logical. You keep trying, but you've got to be sincere. I'm not saying you're not sincere, but we don't have a choice. You give up as much sugar as you can then. But why do you think sugar's the problem? Sugar is one aspect. We're attached. Darling, we're all got attachment, and one of our attachments is food.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Well then, honey, it's a tough one. So this is something else too. When the attachments are very deep, and they are in some of us, it doesn't, well, all of us, very first level, that's why Buddha says at least try not to kill. Try not to do the heavy things. At least don't harm others. That's the heaviest ones. So we'll do everything in our power not to kill. Everything in our power not to badmouth and kill and steal and cheat. As much as we can protect our body and speech. That's incredible. Then we can deduce from that to control our behaviour in general, isn't it? Which means less food, less sex. And this is hard for us because we're all junkies. And food's a typical one for all of us, So all we can do is our best. Be content with your progress. Be humble and accept it's a deep delusion. And do your best every day. And be happy that you're making an effort, because that effort sows seeds. You might not, I'll tell you, I'm attached to food. I don't care about sex, thank goodness. A friend of mine he was never a monk, and he couldn't care less about sex. He became a monk, he became obsessed overnight. So he gave it up after 6 months, and he stopped having attachment to sex again. It was very hilarious, Luckily, I've never wanted to live in the same bed as another person. I mean, I tried it, but it was horrible. I didn't want it. I mean, not horrible. People are nice, but I never wanted to live in the same house, the same bed. I never wanted children. I never wanted a husband. It was lucky, just as well. So I don't care about that. But food is typical for all of us. So as we know, with food, it's there all the time. What will I have for breakfast? Well, I won't have a breakfast. What will I have for this? I won't have that. I will have this. I can't eat sugar. I'll have this one. I have flour. No. Maybe it's gluten. No. Maybe it's this one. Get my point. It's day and night, right? It's bloody endless. So part of the deal is we do our best. We do our best by making clear decisions. Then we will fail. But we got to do our best. And then the biggest problem, though, is what happens is we fail again, and then guilt comes in and puts us down. And that drags us down to hell. So we've got to be really humble, know that we've got this deep habit, own it for what it is, don't beat ourselves up, do our best, keep failing, but keep trying again. And all those efforts, they will build up slowly. They might not bring a result for years, but it'll bring results in the future, knowing you're sowing seeds. But we've got to be very humble and patient. But we want results now, don't we? That's our problem. So at least, given that we've got a deep attachment to food, and it's in my mind, it's always there, not having it, we're having this much, having that much, don't have this much, don't have that much, always it's there. But what part of the process is this, in practice? Because we understand these delusions are profoundly deep, it's going to be many lifetimes when we become enlightened. They're really deeper than we think. That means we get the courage and the humility to learn to live with these crazy roommates. And you've got to recognize them for who they are. So right now, using the analogy of roommates is a good one. Like you've got next door neighbours who make you crazy. All you want to do is that you wish they'd go away. Is that you shout, you yell, you hate them, you wish they'd be quiet. All we want to do is make them go away. So all we want to do is make all these crazy thoughts go away, isn't it? But they won't, darling. So we have to have the grown-up attitude to know that they're in our crazy head. We've got these crazy roommates. They're very old. They've been there a long time. And we learn to give less power to them. We don't identify ourselves with them. Yes, it's true, I'm attached to food, but it's okay. Shut up, And then you fail one time, and then you go, okay, I failed, never mind. It's not the end of the world. I didn't kill anybody. It's okay. I mean, you're just eating too much. Honey, you're not killing. You're not raping people. Be happy that your habits aren't like that. Be happy your habits aren't like torture all day. It's just pathetic old food. It's a bore. See it for what it is. Do our best, but be rejoicing in our efforts, and don't torture ourselves. Do you understand, sweetheart? It's just, we've got to learn to live with these roommates sometimes, because they're not going to go overnight.
It's very helpful.
Good, darling, and rejoice in your effort. Yes.
A little bit. If you're in the middle of something that you've tried to stop for a long time.
What do you mean in the middle? You're about to stab somebody, you stop. What do you mean?
In the middle of, I don't know how, eating sugar.
But what's the question?
You're in the middle, and you get already devastated from the fact that you are again.
Well, stop being devastated for a start. That's guilt.
How do you make yourself stop from being devastated?
That's the same as everything. This is called practice. You make decisions. This is not easy because it's a vicious circle. Because we get guilty and then we get guilty about being guilty and then we say we won't eat too much, then we get guilty about eating. We keep adding new roommates. So it's just difficult work. It's difficult work. But this is why, too, the Tibetan Buddhist one, we've got to do these purification practices. And this practice, Lama Zopa said he puts atomic bombs on delusions. But we've got to be humble and patient. You see, the irony of attachment is, when it's attachment to food, but the other attachment is attachment to being a nice person, attachment to success. So we get miserable when we're not. So we're kind of like, is it never ending? It's very tricky. We've got to be so skillful catching our thoughts and then trying to have positive thoughts and being humble and praising ourselves and doing our best. In other words, if you continually tell that child off every time they do something wrong, they will become exhausted. And that's what we do to ourselves. So that will already... See, part of the problem with eating food too, no doubt, is it makes us overweight. Is that right for you? Makes me overweight. I get fat, you know. And we, of course, can't stand being fat. Then we get even more guilty. That's why we get jealous of people who stay skinny, isn't it? They can eat what they damn well like. You don't look like Sarah. You eat, you look like skinny. Some people don't put on weight. Another one really is because we're fat. We don't like being fat, so we hate ourselves for that. So we keep finding reasons to be miserable with ourselves. It's not easy, darling. So we've got to find this sort of, think we're a load of rubbish, but we're doing okay. It's all right. But we've got to be so rigorous with our thoughts. It's our thoughts that are the problem. Isn't it? Slowly, sweetheart. And try and rejoice that it's only food you're attached to. Yeah. It's not killing, lying, stealing. In fact, if you realise that and you've got morality, you should be weeping with bliss. Truly, sweetheart. When you look at the suffering world, it's just food. It's pathetic old habit. You know, it just makes us fat. That's it. Do you understand? Yeah. Please, sweetheart. Yes, and yes. Come on. Go on. Betty had her hand up before. Go on, Betty.
That's okay. Okay, sorry.
Betty, over there. Betty first.
Okay. Would you say that the person that hurts you is actually your teacher?
In the most advanced stages of the Bodhisattva path, this is why this stuff's very incremental. This is the most advanced level of the Bodhisattva path. There's this whole genre of practices that is all called transforming problems into happiness. So that woman in prison is a perfect example of that level of practice. She was able to reinterpret a nightmare and make it good. So in this 8 verses, there's this little text that's called, usually Tibetans have these beautiful poetic titles. This is the most boring title on the planet. It's called the 8 verses. You couldn't get something more mundane. But it's this amazing series of instructions in these 8 verses that on the face of it aren't complicated. Emptiness sounds complicated. This sounds simple. But if you analyse these verses, they're insane. If you recommended these, if you're a therapist, to your client, they could sue you. So one of them says, just this is the worst one. The person whom you've had great trust and faith in all your life, let's say your daughter, whom you've adored and loved, and she turns against you, you see her as your guru. That's exactly right. But don't say this stuff lightly. This is so heavy duty. It's intense, and it's the most advanced level. So if we're not capable, we do not go there, Don't play with it. Are you with me?
I'm totally with you.
Okay.
I mean, I experienced that.
Okay.
I think like that.
Good, wonderful, fantastic.
But sometimes, or I'm told, or I think I'm wrong.
No, this is the most advanced level of compassion. So if we've got rage, okay, this is an interesting point now where we can misunderstand this. Let's say I'm in a relationship with Shuki and I'm a victim. And we can see in lives, you know, some people are the victim in a relationship. They're the one who gets bullied, who gets beaten, but they're the nice girl. They help mummy, they're good girls, they do all the right things, they try to placate everybody. So that looks such like a nice person. But that's often the victim mentality who sees themselves as a good girl, but always gets abused by others and never knows why, you know, because there's all this attachment and neediness to be seen as a good girl. And then you get, so that's a victim mentality. So then if I listen to that instruction, and I'm sitting there with self-loathing and self-hate, and I'm hopeless and I'm pathetic and I'm nothing and I deserve Shuki to beat me up, and then I hear that I'm supposed to see him as my guru, I'm in serious trouble. That will be like mental illness for me. That is not my instruction. That's way too advanced. So the point is, it's only the person. Pabonka Rinpoche says you've got to be a suitable vessel to have this kind of instruction. That's why in the Buddha's teachings, and we're not used to thinking spiritual teachings are like this, it's like university, it's like advanced university level. And it's implied a suitable vessel is a person who's got renunciation, who's understood suffering, who accepts, who has self-respect, who understands karma, who's able to regret and has compassion for themselves, then has compassion for others, and this is the highest level of that. In other words, the only person who can genuinely do that, and I mean, relatively we can do it if we can, but to really to the level of even accepting the abuse, being abused and loving the person at the same time, is the person who's given up attachment, who's given up pride, who's given up anger, who's really advanced. We can try it out, nothing wrong. A lot of people try this and understand it, but it's a very advanced practice to really do it seriously. And they say when you're really advanced like that, the bodhisattvas have more compassion for the bad people than the good, than the victims, because they're the ones, the victim has just finished their suffering, but the other person has just begun unbearable lifetimes of suffering, because that's the basis. So this one of a teacher, that's true, it's exactly the point, because this is forcing me to deal with my delusions. You know, I like to use the ordinary analogy in ordinary life. I always think of Lance Armstrong, because I remember reading an article about him in New Yorker. He's like this, I mean, he's a fanatic, you know, ordinary, deluded fanatic. I mean, now he's a naughty boy, I understand. But this energy he had to never give up the high mountains. The more high the mountain, the worse the challenge, the happier he was. Well, that's this, but spiritually. The more the people harm you, the more you get abused, the more horrible situations, the happier you are, because it's grist for your mill. That's the attitude. Do you understand what I'm saying? And we all see this would be exhausting. Couldn't live like that. So bodhisattvas would rather live with a person they can't stand, because they'd show they love them totally. Do you understand? So bodhisattvas are doing the opposite to what the world does. It's kind of intense. Are you with me? Yes.
I have also a question.
Yep. A series of questions. Okay, go for it.
The first one is very simple.
We have to give up on a tea break today. We're running out of time, I think. Is that okay? Do you want a quick wriggle? Just a second. Do you want a quick wriggle and stand up for a second? You do want. Just a second. Wait. You want a wriggle. What? Stand up and wriggle. You want that? Or you want to keep sitting here? What do you want? Small break. Okay, come on. Small break. 5 minutes. Come back to you soon, darling. You're next on.